They thought they were gonna get away with it. They believed they had impunity and were above the law. They packaged their bags, obtained fake identities, and crossed the border under the cover of darkness in the shadows with coyotes and thought no one would know. Others boldly entered under fake identities and fake visas, believing no one will know and that their tracks weren't being followed. Their final destination was the United States. The plan was simple, at least on paper. The plan was to live the American dream in luxurious mansions, purchased with blood-stained money, and enjoying their complete impunity. They felt untouchable and looked untouchable for a moment at least. They believed they were smarter than a whole nation. Perhaps they believed they were smarter than their own selves. They got too ahead of themselves. But what these wealthy, corrupt, fugitive police officers and diplomats never expected was that their little Hollywood movie that they had going on was about to turn into Mexico's worst diplomatic nightmare, triggering the so awaited direct intervention from an American president. And this American president is Donald Trump, and he's unleashing a manhunt that nobody saw coming in Mexico. Let's think about this for a minute. We are not talking about regular criminals here, like the ones that get into gangs. We are talking about men and women who swore oath to protect us in Mexico. They wore a badge on their chest and carried a weapon paid for with our taxes, as well as politicians. They swore to serve the public for its best interests, but in reality, they were doing the complete opposite while enriching themselves. But after years of abuse and almost overnight, the entire country realized something horrifying. We weren't being protected by any of this. Both neither of the politicians serving their people, and of course the Mexican officers are not doing their jobs since they follow orders from the politicians themselves, who themselves have a horrible agenda going on. We noticed that in reality we were being hunted by the largest, most organized, and most dangerous cartel of them and of all time. That cartel operated in official police patrol cars in broad daylight, and that cartel is the Mexican government. Everything began to unravel and come out of the shadows through scenes and events that turned the stomachs of millions of Mexicans, because deep down we all knew these events were real, and almost all of us also knew that this type of stuff and impunity had been going on for a while in our country under our noses. Now imagine this. You're driving peacefully with your family on a family trip. A family from Puebla was stopped in Mexico City. No reason behind it at all. Out of nowhere, a patrol car blocked their path. You step out of the vehicle trying to defuse the situation, and you try to calmly speak to the police officer. But the officer looks at you like you were inferior. He looks straight at you in the eyes, and with a chilling arrogance, he tells you the following: 2,000 or even 3,000 pesos won't save you from this. The real price for letting you go and letting you keep your car without being impounded is actually between 30,000 to 40,000. But not only were they boldly doing these predatory attacks, they would go to an extreme and abuse their power even more. In an unbelievable display of abuse and power, the officer escorts you and your family to the nearest ATM and watches over you as you proceed to take out money from your life savings and future to give it to them. He treats you like a prisoner and someone who has no options. He is watching over you like a hawk and making sure you withdraw every last peso he demands. Now stop imagining that, because that is the reality that is going on in Mexico right now. No need to imagine. we can see it in some citizens in Mexico and their stories. When videos of incidents like that, one, and eyewitness testimonies began circulating online as well, many people assumed it was just another isolated case that managed to get into the mainstream news. Nothing new, a corrupt officer who is crossing the line yet again. Something the Mexican society has sadly normalized, but in reality, it proved to be a bigger problem than it seemed like. As investigators started to get on these type of cases and digging deeper into the problems, they uncovered that these were not isolated attacks and that the officials were not acting on their own character. In reality, they uncovered a massive extortion network. It wasn't just isolated corrupt attacks, it was a highly organized criminal machine that was efficient, and it would embarrass many of the criminal organizations and make them look weak as well compared to them. These officials were not acting on their own. It had actually become a standard operating procedure for them. Authorities in criminal regions such as the state of Mexico and Guanajuato confirmed the unimaginable. These officers weren't patrolling in their police vehicles in the streets to catch criminals. In reality, it was the complete opposite. They were operating under what can only be described as a corporate model of terror and planned and executed terror. These police officials had daily quotas. Yes, you heard that correctly. These superiors above them demanded that they should collect specific amount in bribes every single day, and those officials of course did. They completed their duty that was demanded from above. They worked in organized shifts using carefully planned strategies that they would come up with their own to abuse their power. These strategies were designed to squeeze as much money as possible from ordinary citizens like me and you. And not only that, it gets worse. There was bonuses and rewards for the teams that managed to collect the most dirty money during shifts. They had competitions to see who could extort the most and who was better at it. It was an all-out competition. They competed to see who could financially destroy the greatest number of Mexican citizens in a single workday, and they had success doing so. And if you are wondering where all this money went, this is where the story takes another shocking turn. The corruption didn't just end in the pockets of police officers and their captains. Internal affairs investigators and intelligence units began following the money trails. What they discovered was shocking but not surprising. They discovered a perfect pyramid scheme. The money flowed upwards through the chain of command until it reached high-ranking officials, and from there on, we know the rest. With all these illegal profits they managed to get their hands on, which was a lot of money. We're talking about big numbers. Almost all officers from low level to middle and high ranks began purchasing luxury homes and multi-million-dollar properties. Everyone was getting a piece of the pie, and the kids were getting chubby, eating so much. It was a perfect pyramid scheme. From one day to another, you saw your neighbor who worked as a police officer start purchasing better and newer cars and start being more luxurious. Of course, a lot of these assets were not registered under their own names. They used frontmen and shell owners to conceal their unexplained wealth. But every party eventually has to end, and this was like a house party that was ultimately ended by other officials. Once the scandal exploded across the media and public outrage reached a boiling point, Police departments and everyone involved in this scheme started going into full panic mode. Dozens of officers were suspended in a single day. The walls were closing in on them. And this is where we are at right now, in a moment where Mexico's internal crisis crossed the border into the United States and turned into a geopolitical issue. Feeling cornered by the justice system that is fully closing in on them, a faction of these corrupt officials decided to flee. Others are dealing with the consequences, like politicians Rocha Moya, who is fleeing the United States justice in Mexico. However, the ones that decided to run didn't just run anywhere. They ran up north. They ran into the mouth of the wolf that is chasing them, both of them to do so. Some crossed into the United States through illegal routes that they themselves knew and once got a commission from. They paid the smugglers to get across, the same smugglers they once were extorting, putting their life in the hands of the ones they once oppressed, and made illegal business with them. They were scared, doing anything they could to try and get away. Others, who were more fancy and of a higher ranking profile, with more resources of course, used tourist visas and changed their identities and tried to scatter across different states in the United States, believing that the Mexican justice system was weak and could never reach them. An example of such was Cesar Duarte, a corrupt politician from Chihuahua who was arrested in Miami under a fake name and was wanted in Mexico as well for human rights violations. These officials and politicians thought they were smarter and believed they could disappear, but they made a fatal miscalculation. As the number of cases got bigger and the crime started to get worse for society in Mexico, they were building a case that reached the highest levels of intelligence and ultimately made the United States unavoidable to ignore what is going on their neighbor country. The White House took notice and took action. The President of the United States saw what was happening, Mr. Donald Trump, and directly intervened, and not with a simple statement. He announced that all identified suspects who had entered the United States territory would be tracked down and immediately returned to Mexico, seizing assets and so on, and returning them back with nothing, in hopes that the government of Mexico would do its right. What started as a corruption scandal that was only involving police officers in the state of Mexico and Guanajuato and other Mexican states escalated into a major issue of border security and immigration policies between two nations. The USA government and authorities made it clear they will not allow corrupt element officials and politicians of the Mexican system to use their country as a safe haven. Diplomatic tensions rose quickly. Meanwhile, fugitives were doing everything in their hands to try and save themselves. And as the situation in Mexico continued to unravel, they didn't know what to do. And what investigators uncovered next was even darker, because if you thought this corruption was limited to fake traffic fines or extorting drivers for a few thousand pesos, you were wrong. The investigation led directly to Mexico's southern border in Chiapas, and what was discovered there was beyond shocking. Officers assigned to that region weren't just collecting illegal tolls and committing extortion to the population. According to formal accusations, they used identity checkpoints as a cover to hunt migrants and commit extortion or other horrible crimes to them. They detained them, isolated them, and instead of processing them Legally, they kidnapped them. The fate of the migrants was vulnerable. They will demand ransom payments for them from their families in exchange for not disappearing them or handing them over to worse fates. They were operating exactly like an organized crime. In fact, intelligence reports indicate they made direct deals with human trafficking networks, turning blind eye on key routes in exchange for money. They became a facilitator and supporter of illegal migration across southern Mexico, and in cases worsened the human trafficking in Mexico and the United States. To give another example, a state of Mexico, a police officer in Mexico was arrested in Almoloya del Rio while attempting to extort a transport worker. He was demanding 10,000 pesos under the threat of planting evidence and sending him to the prosecutor's office. That would have been a big hit on his life. They could have held him back for some time. The most crazy part of this case was the fact that when investigators looked into him, they discovered he was supposedly on vacation. The officer was on vacation and was still committing crimes under the Mexican badge during his supposedly timed off. The addiction they had to easy money, violence, and extortion had completely consumed them, and leaving that in the past would be tough. That was not a habit that they will break easily. President Claudia Sheinbaum had to publicly address the scandal. It got too big for her to ignore. She needed to do something. And as we know, something that Claudia has been doing is protecting her Morena politicians. She protects Rocha Moya, giving him National Guard and Army of Mexico to protect them, instead of giving him up to the United States justice system, who has a warrant out for him. However, she promised justice, and she promised that the crackdown would not stop at low-ranking officials. She would target everyone involved and get to the bottom of this. At least that's what she is promising. And she is targeting some politicians, as long as they are not from Morena. She stated that responsibility will extend all the way up to the chain of command, to the superiors who set quotas and profited from the system while sitting in comfortable offices. But the question we are all asking is whether that will actually happen. Will she keep her word? And as we have seen lately, she is not. And will she bring justice to millions of Mexicans who were abused by the same system they trusted? As we know, she is also not doing that. As this scandal keeps on becoming bigger on the streets, the fear is very real. Citizens often feel more in danger when they see police checkpoints than when they walk through dark streets. One man described how a commander demanded 5,000 pesos from him, and when he refused, officers punctured his tire just to justify the confiscation of his vehicle. That is the level of abuse that is being reported here. To try and stop this wave of corruption, the Mexican government announced new measures that sound impressive on paper, but will they keep this code alive? They said all officers would be required to wear a body camera to record every interaction with citizens, copying the system that the United States has in place, or at the very least, imitate it. They also want all fines to be handled digitally, completely eliminating cash payments and direct handling of money. The idea is to cut off access to physical cash entirely, but there's a detail there that makes people skeptical. Investigators have already discovered that some officers had full control over digital systems themselves, therefore making the new system that is being in place worthless. They manipulated databases to delete official fines, leaving no trace of extortion. They also changed patrol zones to more profitable areas without notifying central commands. So, if they already have the ability to manipulate the system from the inside, what guarantees that the body cameras won't simply be turned off at the right moment as well? They are already messing around with the new system that is being implemented. They are not going to follow rules. The problem goes deeper than technology. It is a crisis that affects the legitimacy of authority itself in the country of Mexico. When the people that are meant to protect you are the same ones kidnapping you, extorting you, and fleeing like criminals when exposed, that means something deeper. The system is not just broken, it is rotten to the core and needs a serious reset. This case has escalated beyond an internal affairs investigation. It is now being treated like the serious human rights violations in a large scale of organized crime that it is, in fact is. Today, dozens of officers have been suspended. Some are in jail. Others are being deported under USA orders, facing international shame. The luxury homes and properties that once belonged to them have been seized, but no one is naive about what comes next. The government is urging citizens to stay vigilant, to document abuse, to record officers when possible, and demand identification whenever you are stopped. The whole system is under surveillance and cannot be trusted. This type of civil resistance has become the first line of defense. The entire country of Mexico and now the world, as well as the White House, is watching closely. Everyone is paying attention. The real challenge is not catching a corrupt traffic officer asking for 2,000 pesos. The real challenge is whether the justice system will reach the top of the pyramid and stop everything altogether. Because if the higher-ups, the commanders, officials, and politicians who set quotas and benefited from the system they were abusing are not held accountable, then the justice system is truly not doing its job, and justice is truly not being served, and nothing will ever truly change. If the corrupt higher-ups continue to be in power, then everything stays the same. They can get rid of a police officer today, and tomorrow they can hire someone else who will put on the same uniform and continue the same cycle. And the corruption will never end as long as the higher-ups who are corrupt themselves stay in power. Then that brings us to the most important question of all. Do you think the intervention of the United States and the deportation of these fugitives will be enough to deliver the final blow to clean up the police in Mexico and clean up the whole corruption pyramid scheme that they have going on down there? Or do you believe that, as always, the big fish will walk away untouched and the system will return to its old habits in just a few months whenever the scandal dies off? And how things are looking so far, they're not good. We have Rocha Moya, former governor of Sinaloa under Morena, under Sheinbaum, who has been declared a wanted person by the United States for being linked to the Sinaloa cartel. What did Sheinbaum do in response, you may ask? She gave him military to protect him from being arrested by American officials. And let's be honest here, this is what people really fear. When people in power walk with impunity, it really opens their eyes and makes them realize that the people meant to protect them are the same ones targeting them. If nothing changes at the top, nothing will change at the bottom, and nothing will ever change if that happens. Lower level officials have been fired or arrested. However, that will not really help a lot because the people who created this system of corruption has been staying intact and has been walking with impunity. And if that happens, the cycle will never end, as I keep saying it. What do you think about everything going on in Mexico right now? Do you believe we are in track to cleaning up the country and making a better, less corrupted future for the citizens of Mexico? Or will Sheinbaum act like she's doing something and continue this system? Will she act like she's doing something and do nothing at all, like other Mexican presidents have done in the past?